For my research project, I am focusing on the life and leadership style of John Adams. While there's no doubt that he had a great impact and a lot of influence before, during, and after the American Revolution, he is rarely talked about in the same way that we describe other leaders like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, or even Patrick Henry. Through my research, the one thing that stands out the most when comparing him to the other men of this time is his leadership style. His motives and fundamental beliefs throughout his life that shaped his style were greatly influenced by his early life and education, his ideas about the characters of the men, specifically the ones that he worked with to help guide our nation to independence, and his family, most notably his wife Abigail. My research began by looking at his family history. His great-grandfather, Henry Adams, was one of the original founders of Braintree, Massachusetts, which is now known as Quincy, Massachusetts. It's south of Boston, for those of you who are familiar with that area. They were Puritans, and John Adams was brought up with very Puritan values. If you've read Olivia and See by David Hackett Fischer, you can see that he outlines the Puritan beliefs and lifestyles, and it's very clear through his actions that John Adams fits well into most aspects of Fischer's descriptions of the Puritans. One way that he does describe the Puritans is a group of people that were driven by purpose. They're known as unbending. They were not open to things that did not coincide to what they believed in. And this is a characteristic that was used to describe John Adams throughout his entire life, especially during the Revolution. Once he made up his mind that America should be independent, he never wavered from that thought process, no matter how tough things got. During the battle losses, he was kind of the cheerleader force that just never stopped believing that this was the right course of action. One of the interesting things about Adams, I guess one of the most interesting to me, was the internal contradictions that you see when you're researching him. He was raised to believe that happiness didn't come from being famous, and commented several times in his life that he was unconcerned with being popular. That was how he saw himself, as differing from other leaders such as Thomas Jefferson, and it was one of his conflicts with Jefferson later in their life. But at the same time, his writing showed that he was very ambitious and he wanted recognition for his work. This conflict was something he dealt with his entire life, and it really did shape his relationships with other leaders of the country. Probably the greatest influence of his life and career was his relationship with his wife Abigail. She was educated and described as someone who was very well spoken and even tempered, and these are two characteristics that John Adams did not have. They wrote to each other often and kept the letters. And by being able to read these letters, it gives us a great deal of insight into how much he actually did rely on her as a sounding board for his ideas regarding the politics of that day. And he valued her opinion, and in her replies you can see that she subtly guided him to better communicate his thoughts when arguing his political views. Her support throughout his life allowed him to take on those roles in leadership that he wanted. He's very different. John Adams is very different from the other leaders of this time, but in my opinion, equally as fascinating in his own way.